Hello everyone, this is Tim Mundorf with Midwest Laboratories. Today we're going to spend a little time looking at manure analysis and making recommendations for manure as a fertilizer source, given some soil test information. So I'm going to walk you through some manure reports and help you understand the numbers that you're going to see there. And then we'll spend a little time looking at a couple of soil reports, making some decisions on how much fertilizer we want to apply, and then meet that recommendation using different manure sources as our fertilizer source. So let's start with walking through a few samples here. This first sample is coming from a hog barn, so this is a slatted floor finishing building that's used to finish barrows and gilts. And we've got manure analysis that have come from there. I actually pulled these samples myself, so pulled them out of the pit using a PVC pipe with a stopper at the end so we could get a nice profile of the manure in that pit, and composited a sample together in a 5-gallon bucket, and then put that in a nice sealed 1-liter plastic container for the laboratory and had the analysis run. So we can see here we've got a couple of different ways of looking at the sample. We've got analysis as received over here in this first column over to the left, and then we've got pounds per 1,000 gallon, pounds of nutrient per 1,000 gallon. We've got pounds of nutrient per acre inch, and then we've got the estimated first year availability of pounds of nutrient per 1,000 gallons. So the pounds per 1,000 gallon and that estimated first year availability are what we're going to focus on, because in this case we are making that application using a commercial honey wagon and injecting this manure product into the soil. So since we're injecting it, we'll be able to take credit for that ammonia. That's one of the first big questions that's out there is with ammonia. It's certainly volatile and can be lost to the atmosphere. And if you just lay the product over the top and don't incorporate it in, a lot of times you'll lose quite a bit of that that ammonia nitrogen. But in our case, we're going to inject it, so we'll be able to take full credit. So we've seen what the different columns are. Let's look at the rows. So row number 1 here, we've got ammonium nitrogen. So that's going to be the ammonia, the NH3, NH4 portion. Organic nitrogen, so this is really going to kind of be everything else that's not ammonia or nitrate, so all of the nitrogen that's in the organic portion of the sample. And here with this hog lagoon, a lot of the nitrogen is actually ammonia, which, since this is a liquid product, and we see that down here when we get to our moisture and total solids, this product is 95% liquid, only 5% solids, which of course if you took the sample you'd know that, because it was pretty obvious when you pulled it. But when you've got a lot of the urine especially coming from the animals that's saved versus a cattle feedlot where a lot of that's going to evaporate off, you can kind of get a lot higher ammonia numbers, it seems like. That ammonia stays in those fairly anaerobic slotted floor systems. So again, ammonia, organic nitrogen, total nitrogen, then we've got phosphorus, and we're rating it here as P2O5. That's a key piece. Since fertilizer that you'd buy commercially is also rated as P2O5, that's how we're given this analysis. Potassium, also rated as K2O, so the same way that fertilizer would be rated, so it's an apples to apples comparison. Once we get over here to estimated first year availability, that is. When we look at this estimated first year availability of the phosphorus, we're just using a calculation. It's about 70% of the total, and on potassium we're running a number that's about 90% of the total is what we're estimating for first year available. Sulfur, we're using, look like about half that number is first year available. Calcium, probably about 3/4 as first year available. Magnesium, taking a little discount. Sodium, the same thing. Some of this is going to be tied up in organic forms and we'll have to mineralize. Copper, we've got our pounds per 1,000 gallon, again our estimated first year available. Same with iron, manganese, and zinc. and in each one of these cases it looks like we're taking about 2/3 credit for those nutrients. Again, we talked about moisture. This is a key number you should look at right away. How much liquid is in the product. Of course, that makes a big difference in how you handle it. If you took the sample yourself, you've probably got a pretty good idea already. And then lastly, this total salts number. That one's pretty important as well. So our pounds of total salts per 1,000 gallon of 109 pounds. We like to be a little careful of that. I've got some disclaimers down here. We'll make it a little larger so you can read those. Oops. Basically, we're saying that our first year available of nitrogen is based on a calculation. Our first year available other nutrients are as well, but the big one here I wanted to pay attention to was total manure salts should not exceed 500 pounds per acre, less than 500 pounds per acre if annual rainfall is less than 25 inches and or the soil cation exchange capacity is less than 12 milliequivalent per 100 grams. So if you got a CEC less than 12 or annual rainfall less than 25 inches, you probably should be even less than that 500 pounds of total salts per year. That number's pretty conservative. We will sometimes tell people it's kind of a conversation starter for us here at the lab. If you're thinking about applying more than 500 pounds per year, we should definitely talk. If you're dealing with a soil that doesn't have much manure history, or a soil that you've already got salinity numbers on and they look pretty good, you aren't seeing any salinity issues, then maybe you should have a little bit more flexibility with how much manure you could apply as far as total salts go. But certainly we want to at least have a conversation and make sure that we're not dealing with any existing salinity issues if we're thinking about applying more than 500 pounds of total salts per year. If you don't have much salinity issues, you could certainly go up from that a little bit. But if you get a real dry year, you're at risk of creating some problems. So the lighter the soil and the less rainfall, then the more likely the plant that you're trying to grow is to wilt, because it can't pull water away from that soil if there's a lot of salinity caused by us adding these additional salts. All right, so we covered get back up here, covered the hog barn sample here, just kind of walking through the numbers quick. Let's get to the next one. We've got a sample here of poultry manure, and for that one, we've got, another key thing to look at early is the moisture. So before we were at 95% moisture, here we're under 30% moisture. So over 30% of the product here is actually solid. So a lot less water that we're applying, a lot more actual manure. So we get up here to our nutrients per ton, and we'll focus mainly on this first year availability. We've got an ammonia number. It's 9 pounds per ton available. The total is 19, so we're assuming some loss here. One of the key things with these solids, with the ammonia, since with the hog manure we are injecting it, we could take full credit for that ammonia. Here with poultry manure, that doesn't normally happen. It's normally spread over the top, so there's going to be some loss. It can be pretty large, 30, 40% per day. So if you were to get this incorporated here within the first day or two, this 9 pounds available is probably pretty accurate. If it sat here for a week before you incorporated it, or if you're no-till and you didn't do any incorporation, you frankly should probably discount that 9 pounds even, and that's tough to say. Might be even half of the 9 would be all that you'd have left over if you left it set out there for a week or more. And then we've got our organic portion. Normally we give about a 35% credit of the organic nitrogen we assume will mineralize that first year. So we see that here with 15 pounds of estimated first year available organic nitrogen, and then our total, basically adding the two together. So assuming we incorporated it within a few days of application, we could take credit for 24 pounds of nitrogen here with this poultry manure. The phosphorus, we've got 67 pounds of first year available as P2O5, so same as fertilizers rated. 48 pounds as K2O, 6 pounds of sulfur, 51 pounds of calcium, 8 pounds of magnesium, 9 pounds of sodium. That's a big one. We just want to make sure, when we're looking at these manures and biosolids and things like that, the negatives like sodium aren't outweighing the positives like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But here we've got quite a bit of fertility. The sodium number isn't too concerning as long as we don't get too aggressive with our application rate. And here we're showing some sulfur, some iron, some manganese, and some zinc. And then back again here to moisture, so we know we're around 30% moisture, 70% solids. Here's this total salts number. So again, we've still got our little warning here about 500 pounds per acre. We've got 168 pounds, so if we divide 500 divided by 168, we come up with about 3 tons is probably the most we'd want to spread if we certainly want to stay below that 500 pounds salt per acre. If you had a soil that didn't have much salinity issues and you wanted to spread a little more, you are adding some risks that you might have some problems in a dry year, but you'd probably be okay. And then lastly here we've got a feedlot manure, so let's look at that one, another a little bit different. So here we've got 75% solid, so similar to our last one, about 24% moisture, so much more solid than our liquid hog manure sample, in the ballpark of the poultry, actually just a little bit drier than what the poultry was. And then on nitrogen. So here on the feedlot manure, it's set out on the lot already for quite some time, so we've got fairly low amounts of ammonia nitrogen per ton, and actually for our first year available, we're pretty much saying, don't count on any, because if you lay it out for a couple of days, it probably is going to disappear. If you were to incorporate it the same day as application, maybe take credit for, a half to 1 pound per ton. And then on the organic side, again, we run around 35% is what we assume will mineralize that first year. So 6 pounds out of the 17 first year available. Our total, when we add them together, so even though this is a dash, there's some rounding here. So this might be like a 0.4, and the 6 might be a 6.4. So that's why we end up with the total as a 7, versus you would normally think, well, hey, this is a 0 and this is a 6, and I'm no math genius, but when you add 0 and 6 together, you don't get 7, you're still at 6. But rounding is the difference here. So we're saying that you could count on 7 pounds between the rounding from these two. But you should probably go back to 6 if you were to just leave this layer on the top of no-till and not work it in at all. All right, phosphorus, again, we're running about 70% of that first year available. Potassium, we run about 90% is what we show as first year available from the totals over here in total nutrient per ton. 3 pounds of sulfur first year available, some calcium, some magnesium, a little sodium, but not much considering all the nutrients we're getting there. Little copper, some iron, manganese, and some zinc. So here our total salts would be 84 pounds per ton. So if we wanted to stay under that 500 divided by 83.6, it's telling me to stay under 6 tons. Now most guys I work with are going to apply more than 6 tons of feedlot manure. So if you wanted to double that, that's going to be now 1,000 pounds of total salt. You better be on some ground that hasn't received a lot of manure in the past. But to get to, say, 12 ton, which would probably be a more normal number for feedlot manure, you're taking some risk. But I would say if you've got soil that hasn't had a lot of manure history and has fairly low salinity, you would probably be okay. All right, so there's kind of just a quick walk through these different manure reports, looking at the results. What we want to do next is, well, let's actually do some real-world examples of how to use these manure products as fertilizer. So let's start with some soil samples. So here's some samples that I pulled personally, and this is actually a field we were looking at applying some hog manure to, again coming from that finishing barn. So in this case, we've got kind of a variety of test levels. So, I always tell people when you look at a soil report, let's go look at CEC first, just to understand what we're looking at here. So this is a, kind of a medium texture soil. Definitely got some clay in it, not really light. It's heavier, it's going to hold some nutrients, but it's not extra heavy. If the CEC were in the high 20s, low 30s, well, that's got a lot of clay in it. This is probably more of a silt loam type soil, but definitely not a sandy soil either. It's got quite a bit of nutrient holding capacity with CECs averaging about 20 there. We look at our pHs, look pretty good. We're right in that neutral to just slightly acidic, so right about where I'd like to be for corn and soybean production. Might want a little higher pH if we were looking at alfalfa. Organic matter, kind of a range here between 2.6 and 3.7, but let's just say we're averaging about 3% organic matter. So good soil, good nutrient holding and supplying capacity with decent organic matter levels. But now let's get into the meat of it. So the meat of this is going to be that, the phosphorus and potassium, and what do we need to be making a recommendation for. So this is a challenge when you're trying to do a flat rate of manure application. If you're set up to variable rate it and you kind of understand these are different zones, you could have a separate recommendation for each one of these areas. In this case, that wouldn't be very easy on this field. This field is about 80 acres. I broke the bottom into two separate pieces and did the hills above the terraces, or the one hill above the terrace, I should say, all in one piece. So I've got kind of a medium test level here up on the hill. The bottom I've got a split between a fairly high and a low, but since I really don't have a good way of varying this product, what I'm probably going to do is just use an average and set my application rate based off the average soil test values for the field. And then on the potassium side, all kind of medium test levels, a little lower than I'd like to see. On the phosphorus, the P1 Bray, in this environment where we're growing, 210 to 240 bushel corn, I would like this number to be around 25 part per million on the P1 Bray, like the P2 to be about double, and we're kind of in that range. And then the Ks, I'd like these to at least be 180 part per million, probably preferably 200 part per million, again for pretty good yields. So we're going to want to make some application there. And of course, we're applying a head of corn, so we're going to need some nitrogen. As we look across the other nutrients, we'd like to get some sulfur out there, so that shouldn't be a problem. Zinc levels are actually fairly high, so I don't really have a need for zinc, but obviously when I'm applying manure, I'm going to get some anyway. Like some manganese. Iron isn't too bad at all. I'd like this manganese number to be like around 12 to 15. Copper's fine. Boron's a little low, but obviously the manure is going to help us out. And a big number here to be paying attention to, since we are looking at applying manure, is over here the soluble salts number. So we've got a 0.1 and 2.2s. Those are very low numbers, so the electrical conductivity or the soluble salts that we're looking at there are very low. Also, these sodium numbers, 14 and 13 part per million, those are very low as well. So there are no salinity or sodium issues on this soil, on this field. So I'm comfortable going a little higher in that total salt application. Again, it's also a fairly heavy soil with quite a bit of buffering capacity. So that leads me to say, well, I'm not as worried about that 500 pounds total salt number. I could go a little higher and still be okay. So we've got a recommendation here from the laboratory. So 225 bushel corn, which this farm, I want to say, averaged about 230 bushels last year. Some fields we had run as high as 260, but we don't normally shoot for 260 as a yield goal, but 225 is a reasonable yield goal for this field on this farm. We had soybeans last year, so we're corn on soybeans. And the recommendation from the laboratory, there's some variation here in organic matter and in carryover nitrates that we can see. So that's going to change a little bit the nitrogen recommendation. But we're going to flat rate it. So let's just say, the lab's recommendation is 230 pounds. Frankly, to me, that's just a little bit high. So let's just make some notes here. So we've got a nitrogen rec, and we're going to look at 230. That's a little high for me, to be honest with you. What the history of this farm would be something more like 180 would be a pretty good recommendation for corn on soybeans. And then I'm also going to make a recommendation using Iowa State's recommendations, their maximum return to nitrogen. And I ran that earlier. I won't show you the computer. It's basically online through Iowa State University. But going through that calculator, I punched in, I think, $440 anhydrous ammonia and $3.25 corn, and their maximum return to nitrogen number was just a little under 150 pounds. So let's look at a couple different recommendations there. And then on the P205, so like I said earlier, I'm going to flat rate this thing. So that's kind of tough to do with the recommendations of 115, 40, and 150 pounds of P205. Let's just average those out. If I average those out, add up the 115, 40, 150, divide it by 3, I come up with 102 pounds. So let's go with just 100 pounds of P205. That's a 1-year rec. And then K2O, we're going to focus on those and we'll kind of let the other things be gravy. So my K2O rec, again, I average these out. It looks like it's going to be about the same as the phosphorus. It's a little more even. But yeah, if I add those up and divide by 3, I come up with 105 pounds. So let's just go with 100 pounds of K2O. Again, with mineralizing organic sources and that whole thing, it's not an exact science with manure, and we're going to round it to the nearest 1,000 gallons anyway. So let's get kind of in the ballpark of the 100 pounds P2O5, 100 pounds K2O, and then let's do look at the sulfur a little bit. So just looking at those, a quick dirty average, 20 pounds. So those are the numbers that I need to go hit with these manure sources. So we're going to kind of look at the different sources and what kind of a recommendation we'd come up with without overdoing the salts, meeting the nitrogen needs, meeting the phosphorus, potassium, sulfur needs. And then, of course, some of these, it may not make sense to meet, all of the need of one of these nutrients. We may need to supplement it with some additional fertilizer some way or another. So let's just kind of take a quick look between our needs and going back and looking at the fertilizer or the manure as a fertilizer source. One other thing I want to throw out there, so this is the Midwest Labs recommendations for P2O5, K2O, and sulfur, and I've got a Midwest Labs, my own recommendation, and the Iowa State recommendations for nitrogen. Let's do a Iowa State recommendation for the P and K. So for a 1-year spread, this is phosphorus and potassium recs for corn grain production. Now we need to average out those P1 and get back up here, the P1 and the K values. So let's go average P1, and that's going to be 17 plus 29 plus 11 divided by 3. So I got an average P1 of 19. I'm going to call this the ISU rec, basically. And we got an average K value of 147, 171, and 152. And then again, we divide by 3, and that becomes a 157. So for 225 bushel corn, we're going to go use Iowa State's this PM 1688. Iowa State's, let's get that front page there so you can see it. General Guide for Crop Nutrient and Limestone Recommendations in Iowa, and that's where this farm is located. So that's why we're going to use Iowa State's recs here. Now, a key thing that we need to know is removal, because I think we're going to have some removal-related recommendations here. So remember, it's according to Iowa State, their removal guide, 0.32 pounds of P2O5 and 0.22 pounds of K2O for corn grain. And then we're going to make a recommendation for corn, and we're going to use the category right here, this P1 Bray and Malik 3P, and our average, go back here, our average P1 number was 19. So off of that, Iowa State is going to say you're in the optimal category. Your recommendation, they've got 58 pounds here, but if you read the fine print down here, it says the amount shown in the table for optimum soil test category is based off 180 bushel corn per acre. Nutrient removal amounts can be adjusted higher or lower for other yield levels. Well, we're 225, and we're 225 times 0.32. That's going to be our crop removal for P2O5. So Iowa State's at 58 for their 180 bushel corn. using that same removal factor, but with our 225 bushel yield, we're going to be 72 pounds of P2O5, oops, P2O5 for removal. And for potassium, we've got a 157. That puts us in the low category. And this is a fine textured soil. So for our low category, so this is the dry ammonium acetate extraction for potassium. And again, we're at 157, so we're right about that 160, and they're saying 90 pounds. Now, they're optimal, again, is the crop removal. Let's just check, since my yield is higher. 225 times 0.22 was their removal number. Yeah, instead of 40, we would have been at 50. This 90 is still probably a pretty good number. So let's go ahead and go with that. So 90 pounds of K2O. So we've got a Midwest Labs recommendation, which would be 100 pounds of P2O5 versus the Iowa State recommendation, which is just removal only, of 72 pounds of P2O5. And we've got a K2O rec from the lab of 100 pounds of K2O, and the Iowa State rec's awful close, 90 pounds of K2O. And you know, what's the difference here? Well, the difference is, like I said earlier, you know, for 225 bushel corn, Midwest Labs would probably like this P1 number to be closer to 25. We're averaging 19. We've got some variation here, and we'd like this potassium number to be, you know, around 200. So we're trying to build, versus Iowa State is trying to do a little bit of building on the potassium, but all they're trying to do is replace removal on the phosphorus. So that said, we've got a couple different things here. We'll make a rec for based off the Midwest Labs rec. If we want to be a little more conservative, we could also have a rec based off Iowa State. So then it becomes how many acres you want to try to get covered with the manure that you have available, or would you rather get it applied maybe a little closer to the barn, and then these higher recs probably make a little bit more sense. So and then of course a lot of this is going to be nitrogen based, so we'll see where that puts us as well. So we know that we need, depending on the theory we're looking at here, either 230, 180, or 150 pounds of nitrogen. We know to build, we'd like 100 pounds P2O5 and 100 pounds of K2O and 20 pounds of sulfur. And then if we were just to be a little more conservative, kind of more of a maintenance type recommendation here, we've got Iowa State's of 72 pounds of P2O5 and 90 pounds of K2O. So that's the math we needed to come up with to decide, what we needed to apply. And now let's go look at our fertilizer sources. So to start with, this is injected liquid hog manure, again 95% moisture coming from the hog barn. We're going to use our estimated first year availability per 1,000 gallons, and it says 49 pounds. So if I've got 230 pound recommendation divided by 49, that's going to be basically 4,700 gallons, because when I divide the 230 by the 49, I get 4.69. Well, that's 4,700 gallons would meet that requirement. So I'd probably, it's the nearest 1,000 gallons is probably about where we're at as far as our accuracy goes. So basically that's going to be 5,000 gallons of liquid hog manure. Not 50,000, but 5,000. So same thing, 180. We divide that by that 49 pounds estimated first year availability. Again, we're going to get it all incorporated. So now that's 3.67 is how that divides out. So that's going to be basically 3,700 gallon. So let's just say round that up to 4,000 gallons. And then if we were going to do 150, I guess that's going to be right around 3,000, isn't it, when you divide that by 49? Yeah, so 3.06, so really it's 3,000. So those are our three different options from a nitrogen standpoint. Do we go with the aggressive recommendation from Midwest Labs, which is going to make sure nitrogen is not a limiting factor? Do we go with kind of the farm norm that we're normally doing out there, about 180 pounds? And I will say we're not adverse to side dressing, so if we throw this out there and things get wet and we get some loss, we will come back and do some top dressing if needed, and we actually use one of the nitrogen modeling tools to help us make that decision. Or we could be a little more conservative, just put the 150 pounds out here. It's going to make it a little more likely that we have to top dress. It's going to make us want to pay a lot of attention to that nitrogen modeling tool. But when you've got manure right there on the farm that we're producing ourselves, it probably makes sense to go more with more like this 4,000 gallon number than to be ultra conservative and have to come back and pay for an expensive nitrogen source. Of course, some of that depends on whether or not you've got environmental issues, the likelihood of loss of nitrogen to groundwater or to surface water on your farm. So all those things need to be considered, but they're kind of outside the scope of making a recommendation here at the lab. So let's do this. We've got a couple of things to think about. We've got a 5,000 gallon rate that we're going to need to think about. We've got a 4,000 gallon rate. 4,000, and we've got 3,000. That's 4,000, not 40,000. And let's kind of space that out here because we're going to cover, what would that be for these other nutrients? We know what we need to do for nitrogen, so let's go back here. So back to the hog manure, right? Make sure we're on the right sample. So we decide we're going to do 5,000 gallons. That's 49 pounds of available nitrogen first year per 1,000 gallons. So times 5, that's 245. Let's throw one other thing out here. Salts. Make sure we don't end up too high there. So at that 5,000 gallon rate, we're 245 pounds of nitrogen, right? A little extra, but again, you only have so much accuracy with these honey wagons. And for our P2O5, first year P2O5, we're only 14 pounds per 1,000 gallons. So 14 times 5, 70 pounds. That would meet that Iowa State requirement, but it would not meet the Midwest Labs one, would it? And K2O, where's that going to put us? Got 35 again times 5,000 gallons, so 175 pounds of K2O. So that will do fine on kind of a build type recommendation. And sulfur. We've got, find our sulfur number here, 2 pounds, so 2 times 5, 10 pounds of sulfur. And that's only going to meet about half of what we wanted there. That's certainly a lot better than nothing. And then our safety check here on the salts, we're 109 pounds per 1,000 gallons, so it's the same. We don't adjust that for first year available. It's 109 pounds times 5, so we're 545. I feel comfortable with that number, especially since we saw on this soil. Let's go back here quick. On this soil, our salinity number, soluble salts, is very low. So I'm not worried about that 545 pounds at all. So salts really is not a limiting factor on this hog manure in this case. So 5,000 gallons would be, there's our nitrogen to meet the Midwest Labs rec. It's going to give us enough phosphorus basically to meet the removal, but we're not really going to build at that number. It's going to give us enough potassium to build and then some. It's going to give us a little lower amount of sulfur than what we wanted from the Midwest Labs rec. And then salts are not an issue. So let's kind of do the same thing for 4,000 gallons. Back here to our manure report. And again, 49, so 49 times 4, 196 pounds. So that's still going to more than meet that 180 pound requirement we've kind of had out there as the normal for the farm. So that makes that number look pretty attractive. 4,000 times 14, again that first year available P2O5. And just just for everybody's knowledge, this P205 number in hogs, a lot of times we've seen this number go down quite a bit in the manure analysis because of the use of phytase. That enzyme allows, the phytase enzyme allows pigs to digest the phosphorus in corn better than they used to be able to. So you used to have to supplement a pig's diet with dicalcium phosphate, I believe it was called dical. And now they don't have to do that anymore, so there's less phosphorus in the manure, and actually on top of that they're also taking more phosphorus out of the corn, so it's kind of a double whammy. You don't have the dical going through the pig and ending up in the manure, and you don't have all the phosphorus from the corn that used to go through the pig and end up in the manure. Now the pig's actually making use of that phosphorus. So there's an enzyme that they add to feed now that's kind of changed the game on how much phosphorus is in this manure. So I take that 14 pounds times 4, and I've got 56 pounds of P205. And in all honesty, that's a little low. So I probably should supplement this, or knowing it's a corn bean rotation, when I come back next year for the soybeans, number one, this is just a one-year spread, so you need to come back and fertilize the soybeans. Number two, we probably, if we didn't add additional phosphorus, which this actually has a 2x2 starter, the grower uses a 2x2 starter on this farm, so we could throw some phosphorus in that 2x2 as 1034O or some other product. Not trying to be product specific here. So again, on the potassium side, we've got 35 pounds times 4, and that's 140. So we got 140 pounds of K2O, so we're still meeting our potassium needs, both from the Midwest Labs rec or the Iowa State rec. The sulfur, that's going to be a little lower. What were we, 2 pounds of available sulfur? Yeah, 2 pounds of available sulfur per gallon, so of course don't need a calculator on that one. That's just going to be 8. And total salts, we already know that we're just under, or just over that 500 number as it is. So now this one would be 436 pounds at 4,000 gallons. All right, last of all, and to me actually, I'm done. This 180 pound number is a number I'm really comfortable with. I end up with actually a little bit more at that 4,000 gallon rate, and these numbers are acceptable to me. I know either we need to add some phosphorus in the starter, or just in the future we need to come back, like on the soybeans, and add more than crop removal to start getting our build going, because we're not really meeting it here. Or you could say, you know what, I want to build and I want to follow that Midwest Labs rec for the 100 pounds P205, so you need to come back and add another basically 50 pounds P205 through a dry spread. 100 pounds of MAP would get you there. But lastly, let's just say that we were in an area where, really we wanted to pay attention to the environmental side. We did not want to exceed that maximum return to nitrogen that Iowa State puts there. So let's just say we're going to do 3,000 gallons. So 3 times our 49 is 147 pounds of N. And then 3 times our 14, 42 pounds P205. Which is quite a bit under crop removal. Actually, we were quite a bit under crop removal at the 4,000 gallon rate. And the K2O at 35 times 3 would be 105. Sulfur, 2 times 3, I don't need a calculator for that one, that's just 6. So, if we were to say, well, we don't want to be going over, and then salts, we were at 109, and so that would be 327 pounds of total salts. All right, so if we were to say, the environmental concerns related to nitrogen are kind of our overriding issue here, so we need to make sure we're not going above nitrogen application recommended by the maximum return of nitrogen, which, I always had plenty of issues with the Mississippi Gulf and the city of Des Moines lawsuits, so that's certainly a valid thought process. And then in that case, we probably need to supplement the P2O5, especially if we're going to try to build, and maybe put down 120 pounds of MAP. We're good on the K2O. Probably should supplement the sulfur a little bit. Our recommendation was 20 pounds. We're only going to get 6. Maybe putting another 10 pounds of sulfur out there in some product, and then salts are not an issue at that rate. If we decide to go the 4,000 gallon, which is actually what I would recommend for this farm, and it's my family's farm, that's going to give us the nitrogen at 196 pounds to meet the kind of the norm of 180. It's going to give us 56 pounds of P2O5. It's a little less than what I'd like it to be, but if I come back and add some additional in front of the soybeans, I can make that up. Good on the K2O. Probably should add a little sulfur, but might call it good. There we go. So, and then if we were to try to follow Iowa State's recommendations, since really nitrogen seems to be the limiting factor, it's just not an issue here for the products that we're looking at. So that's the hog manure. Let's look a little bit at other manure sources. So let's say that we didn't have access to this hog manure, but instead, whoops, we've got access to this poultry manure. So we saw all these calculations. I'm going to pull some of this stuff out of here. Let's do it like this. Delete that. Delete that. Let's rethink things here. The needs of the soil are still the same, so we still got a recommendation from the laboratory for basically, get rid of this too, 230 pounds of nitrogen. I've got my own recommendation for corn on soybeans on this farm of about 180 pounds of nitrogen, and then we've got a recommendation from Iowa State's maximum return to nitrogen of 150 pounds, given corn price and price for nitrogen right now. We've got the lab's recommendations for P2O5, K2O, sulfur, assuming that we're going to flat rate the whole field. If we've got the ability to zone it, then of course we'd have multiple recommendations because there's quite a bit of variation there. And we've got Iowa State's recs. And now we're looking at poultry manure. So we've got total salts here of 168. So number one, 500 divided by 168 is only 3 tons of poultry manure. So to standard those salts, we'd have to stay to 3 tons or less. Now, like we've talked about a couple times here now, this soil, heavier soil, no salinity issues right now, doesn't have a lot of history of manure application. It's probably gotten some, but not a lot. And again, the salinity's not really there. So let's say that I was a little more comfortable with doubling that 500 number. And now let's do 1,000 pounds of total salts. Again, I don't want to go crazy. That'd be 6 tons of poultry manure. 6 tons of poultry manure when I'm already getting 67 pounds of P2O5 per bushel, or I'm sorry, per ton, probably don't really need that. That 3 ton number may not be that bad from a phosphorus and potassium perspective. Let's go do the math. All right, so total nitrogen, and this is no-till. So frankly, I probably can't take full credit for that ammonia. I'm going to discount that ammonia number down to 3 and pray for a little rain. So now 3 pounds of ammonia nitrogen. Now, where did I come up with that number? To be honest with you, I kind of, pulled it out. And I made that one up. But I can't take credit for the whole 9. Now, it's already discounted quite a bit from the 19. I'm going to say 20% of the 19, I'm going to hope, is still available to me after it lays out on top for a long time. That's 3.8. you know what, let's just 3.8, let's go with 4. And I'm going to apply, again, 500 divided by 168, we were comfortable with about 3 ton. Let's look at 4 ton. So 4 ton of poultry manure, I'm going to get, again, we said 4 pounds on the ammonia plus 15, so I got 19 times 4 ton, it's 76 pounds. So I got 76 pounds of N from manure. That means if I go this route, I need to apply another 154 pounds. So we're going to have to supplement that with some commercial nitrogen. Or, same thing, we're going to go with that 4 ton number. That would be 76 pounds here. And then I need 104 of additional N. And here, 150 minus 76. So again, I'm 76 pounds from that 4 ton rate. Let's put that up here so we remember it. And that's going to leave me with needing another 74 pounds of nitrogen. So, 4 tons. 67 times 4, that's 268 pounds of P2O5. That's a lot. Now, like I said, this is a corn bean rotation. So if we just laid this in front of the corn, we're a little more than double the rec. That's probably not all bad for a corn bean rotation. And that's going to allow us to build, and we wanted to build this a little bit because we're averaging 19. We'd like to average a little closer to 25. K2O. So 48 times 4 is going to be 192. Which that looks awful large also compared to this 100-pound rec. But again, this is a corn bean rotation. We could say, let's get a 2-year spread out here, and then we'll come back and do something similar to it in front of the corn next time, or not use poultry manure but use commercial fertilizer. But here we could probably go ahead and meet all the fertility needs of 65, 70 bushel soybeans pretty easily as well. Sulfur, we've got 6 pounds, so 6 times 4, great, 24. We're going to meet our needs there. And total salts, we did a 4 ton rec and 168 times 4, 672 pounds. You want some caution with that. So that's our 4 ton rate. Let's do also over here, let's try a 3 ton rate. So 3 ton is, again, we were 4 plus the 15, so 19 times 3, 57 pounds. $230 minus 57, 173 pounds of additional commercial fertilizer. Here we're again 57 pounds and need 180 minus 57. So, I'm just going to round this up. Nobody buys 123 or 173 pounds of commercial fertilizer, right? Or commercial nitrogen, although by the time you adjust it for your real product. And then we're still 57 pounds and 150 minus 57. So we need 95. All right, and then, okay, so now we're at a 3 ton rate, and back here, so phosphorus, 67 pounds, first year available, times 3, 201. Boy, that looks good. 201, and 3-ton rate, we're going to be 48. 48 times 3, 144. Sulfur, what were we, 6? Yeah, 6 times 3, 18. Get over here under the right column. Doing it in a Word document, there's no real columns. And then on the salt side, maybe we'll feel a little better about this one. 168 times 3. Yeah, right at that 500 pounds, so 504. So if we had a soil that had some salinity issues, I would say we better stick with the 3-ton so we don't end up exceeding that 500-pound number. We don't have salinity issues in this field, so the 4-ton isn't too bad, but the 3-ton still meets basically a 2-year spread of the P2O5, gives us about a year and a half on the potash, gives us a full year on the sulfur. We might be able to cover a few more acres. We will need to supplement it with some more commercial fertilizer on the nitrogen side, but we're going to have to do that anyway. So, you kind of look at your convenience too. Can I save, any trips? Well, really the 3 and the 4-ton rate, you're still probably going to have the same supplemental fertilizer in year 1, which is none. In year 2, you might say I need to add some potash on the beans. But that's going to be about it, and that's just at the 3-ton rate. At the 4-ton rate, you've covered both years completely on P and K. You might still want some sulfur on your beans, but you've covered all the sulfur for the corn, and whichever rate you choose, you're going to have to add additional nitrogen commercial fertilizer. Now, if we went with that Iowa State rec on the P and the K, then frankly, I'd say the 3-ton rate, would be a little bit better. To just not overpower things with phosphorus. If your recommendation was for 70 pounds instead of 100, then the 200 pounds here would really be almost 3 years worth of spread, but the 144 still wouldn't quite be a 2-year spread. So you could go either way. You're going to have to kind of look at a combination of what's more convenient for you. You obviously have to spend a little more diesel to spread a 3-ton rate, but there's some benefits to manure that aren't just the fertility we see here. There's that soil health and soil biology. So you can cover more acres at that lighter rate. So you might consider that as a benefit too. So, that's kind of the math that you would go through to make that recommendation for that manure product. Let's do one more. So we've got feedlot manure here. Let's take a look at that feedlot manure. And still got the same theories, right? We're still, the fertility needs of the crop, that doesn't ever really change. Whoops, going a little too far. It's, what you're going to do to meet those needs is what changes the most. So we still have, our Midwest Labs rec and our own rec and our Iowa State rec for nitrogen. We still got a Midwest Lab rec for phosphorus, potassium, sulfur. We still got salt concerns, and then we've got the Iowa State recs here. So those are just the things that we're kind of comparing this to. So last fertilizer product was going to be feedlot manure. So again, back to our salt concern. We got 84 pounds of salt per ton. So 500 divided by 84. Would tell me a 6-ton rate. I'm not sure, my dry spreading guy can evenly spread a 6-ton rate. I think I need at least a 10-ton rate for my guy. It just depends on, you need to talk to your applicator if you're doing your own application, understand your ability to put down an even spread with dry fertilizer. Most of the guys doing poultry have got a little more accurate application equipment than a straight manure spreader. But that's certainly got to be a consideration in this too. Let's just say that I need to apply at least a 10-ton rate for accuracy. Okay, so 83.6 times 10, that's 836 pounds of total salt. That's way over that 500-pound number that we put out here in our disclaimer. So there are some concerns. If I had a dry year, I might be adding some salinity that worries me. I'm just going to say in this case, with this soil, with no salinity issues whatsoever right now, and not too much concerns and some good buffering capacity, I'm going to roll the dice and I'm going to say let's do a 10-ton application. So I got 7 pounds total nitrogen between the ammonia and the organic. This is going to lay over the top. It's all no-till. Maybe I should just forget that ammonia and go with the 6 pounds. I think I will. So 6 pounds per ton. I'm going to do 10, so obviously that's 60. And 230 minus 60, that's going to leave me 170 pounds needed. 10-ton rate, again, this stays the same, 60 pounds and 120 pounds of commercial nitrogen needed. And the 150, again, 60 pounds coming from that 10-ton. So this is, write this up here so don't forget it, 10-ton feedlot manure. And that's going to leave us with 90 pounds needed. Okay. On the P2O5 side, 23 pounds per ton. So simple math, right? With 10-pound rate, 230 pounds P2O5. So we don't need to apply any additional, and really that's a 2-year spread there. These spaced out so it's a little easier to read. Okay, K2O, we need 100 pounds of potash. So 16 times 10, 160. Not quite that 2-year spread we're looking for. And again, this is a corn bean rotation, and for those of you who don't know, high yield beans oftentimes actually take off more potassium than high yield corn does. So probably gonna have to supplement that, at least for the soybeans, on year 2 with some fertilizer, but we probably met the needs of both crops there with the phosphorus. Again, we're trying to build a little bit. Our removal is only 90 pounds. So this, probably won't cover removal for both crops anyway. Sulfur, 3, so that's 30 pounds. Gonna be plenty. And salts at that 10-ton rate, 836. So, we've got some concern there, but we also know that evenness of spread is a concern. If we thought we could do 7-ton instead and get an even spread on it, let's see, 83.6 times 7, we would get us down to 585. I'm going to go with rolling the dice a little bit on the salts, but picking evenness of spread. And then for the Iowa State, same thing. We got 230 pounds here, so that would really be 3 years worth of removal, again using the corn removal number. And on the potassium, still really just about 1.5 years. A little more than that, but not quite 2 years of potassium, but closer to 2 years of potassium with that 10-ton spread again. So I think that pretty well wraps it up. We've gone through how to make a recommendation for 3 different manure products, all assuming the same soil test analysis or data, where we've got these soils where on the average we'd like to build up the phosphorus levels a little bit, we'd like to build up the potassium levels a little bit, we're a little low on sulfur. We've got recommendations from the laboratory for 225 bushel corn, so we kind of figured at 230 pound, 230 we were using? Yeah, 230 pound nitrogen rec, 100 pound P2O5 rec, 100 pound potash rec, and the 20 pound sulfur rec. We didn't really need much else, so let's just say 2 pounds of manganese at our 10 pounds of feedlot manure. Did we get our manganese? So 0.69 times 10 is 7 pounds. And whoops, get back to the right sheet here. So yeah, we would have covered that quite easily. Boron, let's just go look at that. So we wanted 1.5 pounds of boron according to the laboratory, and with this feedlot manure here, I don't even have a boron number on the feedlot manure. Let's go look at the poultry manure. Nope. Nope. Separate analysis. Looks like it's not on the standard test for manure anyway. So bottom line is we've made these recommendations for this soil. We've looked at 3 different manure products as our fertilizer source, and we've made recommendations for those products for 10-ton feedlot manure, 3 and 4 ton poultry manure, and we looked at 3, 4, and 5,000 gallon application rates for that hog manure. And we saw the different effect on how much nitrogen we'd get, whether we needed to supplement it. Of course, with the hog manure, there's plenty of nitrogen there because of all that ammonia nitrogen that's available in that liquid product. And since we're injecting it, we take full credit for that first year available ammonia product. With the feedlot and the poultry, we discount those a little bit since we're laying them over the top. And then, of course, with only the organic nitrogen and at rates that kind of match more what we needed for phosphorus for a couple year spread. Frankly, there wasn't a lot of nitrogen, and also we looked at that salt as a limiting factor and making sure we weren't going overboard there. You know, you'll hear guys talk about throwing down 40 ton of feedlot manure. Well, I sure wouldn't want to do that on this product with this salt level. Now, other feedlot manure products might have a lot less total salts in it, might be no problem doing that, 20, 30, 40 ton. But here I really wasn't more comfortable than doing just the basic 10 ton. So you need to do an analysis of the manure product and know what you've got, and then go understand what your soil needs and match them up. So hopefully this was pretty understandable for everybody. We are going to be offering CCA credits for this program. So one thing you might want to do is, if you are a CCA and you want some CEUs for this, email me, and let me put my email address up here. It's lowercase. So I'll make that a little larger for you. If you would like to take a short quiz and get continuing education units for your certified crop advisor role, email me, and this looks like it'll be about an hour program, so we'll have 1 hour of continuing education credits for nutrient management for any CCAs or certified professional agronomists, CPAGs out there that want to email me. I'll send you a little quiz. If you pass the quiz, I'll submit it to the American Society of Agronomy and get you the CEUs. So with that, I thank you for your attention and sticking with me here as we walked you through how to make fertilizer application recommendations using manure as fertilizer source based off soil test values. Thanks again for your time, and appreciate the business you do with Midwest Laboratories.